Across the countryside of Brazil, Argentina, and Venezuela, there's one particular sound older farmers still warn you never to walk toward at night. A horse's gallop that doesn't sound quite right. If you hear hooves pounding the dirt road on a Thursday night, followed by a scream that isn't a horse and isn't human, get inside immediately. She's known across Latin America as La Mula sin Cabeza, the Headless Mule, and she is one of the oldest, most feared curses in the region's folklore. Today I'll take you through what she is, the very specific sin said to create her, and one account from rural Brazil that's still told exactly the same way today. Descriptions of La Mula sin Cabeza are remarkably specific and consistent across an enormous stretch of the continent. She appears as a mule, or sometimes a horse, running wildly through empty country roads late at night, always alone. Where her head should be, witnesses describe only a raw, open stump, sometimes wrapped loosely in chains. From that stump, flames and sparks pour out with every breath, lighting the road ahead of her like a torch. Her hoofbeats are described as unnaturally loud, and her scream, somewhere between a horse's neigh and a woman's cry of pain, carries for miles. She runs the same handful of nights, most commonly Thursday night into Friday, though the exact night shifts slightly from region to region. But every single version of the legend agrees on one detail. Underneath that fire and fury, La Mula sin Cabeza was never actually an animal. She was a woman. The most repeated origin story is disturbingly specific, and repeated the same way across huge distances with almost no variation. In the story, a woman living in a small rural town begins a secret, forbidden relationship with a Catholic priest. Sometimes she's described as married to another man. Sometimes simply as a woman the community considered should have known better. Either way, the relationship itself, a woman involved with a man of the cloth, was considered one of the gravest possible sins in these deeply religious communities. According to the legend, that sin didn't stay hidden, and it didn't go unpunished by whatever forces were listening. As punishment, the woman was cursed. Every Thursday night, exactly at midnight, her body would violently transform into a mule. Her head would vanish entirely, replaced by open flame, and she would be forced to run, screaming, until the first light of dawn. At sunrise, exhausted and covered in ash, she would transform back into her human form, remembering, in most versions, absolutely nothing. This would repeat every single week for the rest of her natural life, an endless cycle of shame turned into literal, physical torment. One of the most detailed accounts of an actual encounter comes from a rural farming community in interior Brazil. A man named Tomás was riding home late one Thursday night, later than he'd intended, after helping a neighbor repair a fence. He'd heard the old warnings his whole life, but like a lot of young men, he'd never taken them especially seriously. As his horse carried him down a familiar dirt road, he first noticed the smell, something sharp and burning, like scorched hair carried on the wind. And came the sound, hoofbeats, but wrong somehow, too heavy, too fast, hitting the ground with an almost metallic rhythm. His own horse stopped dead in the road, ears pinned back, refusing to take another step forward no matter how he urged it. That's when he saw the glow, orange and flickering, moving fast along the road toward him from around a distant bend. Within seconds, it resolved into a shape, a mule-like animal running at impossible speed, flames pouring from where its head should have been. Tomás froze completely, watching it barrel down the exact road he needed to travel, chains rattling somewhere beneath the fire and smoke. As it passed, close enough that he felt real heat against his face, he heard the sound clearly for the first time, a scream that broke halfway between animal and human. It didn't stop, and it didn't seem to notice him at all, simply continuing past in a trail of sparks and the overwhelming smell of burning. Tomás sat frozen in the road for several minutes after it disappeared, before finally convincing his own terrified horse to move again. He rode the rest of the way home at a dead run, and by his own account, never once took that same road alone on a Thursday night again. Versions of this legend, with strikingly similar core details, appear across Brazil, Argentina, Venezuela, Colombia, and several other Latin American countries. Folklorists trace the legend back directly to Iberian Catholic folklore, brought to the Americas during colonization and reshaped by local rural life. In that reading, the curse functioned as a very deliberate, very effective piece of moral enforcement in deeply religious farming communities. Story specific enough and frightening enough to make anyone think twice before crossing certain social and religious lines. Other versions lean less on religious sin and more on betrayal in general. punishing any woman who broke a serious promise or vow. Either way, the punishment in the story is always the same: transformation, fire, and an endless, exhausting nightly run with no rest. Communities that took the legend seriously developed specific, practical rules passed down the same way any survival knowledge would be. Rule 1. Never travel alone on isolated country roads on a Thursday night, especially not after dark. Rule 2. If you smell burning with no visible source or hear hooves that sound too heavy or too fast, get off the road immediately. Rule 3. Never look directly at her if she passes close by. Several tellings insist eye contact alone can draw her attention toward you. There's also a specific, if rarely attempted, method described for breaking the curse entirely, passed down in several regional versions. According to these tellings, if someone manages to strike her and draw blood or successfully removes the chain or bridle from around her neck, the curse breaks immediately. In that instant, she's said to return to her human form on the spot, weeping, remembering everything, and finally free of the weekly torment. Very few storytellers claim this actually happened in their own family's version of the tale. It exists mostly as a thin thread of hope inside an otherwise brutal punishment. Some versions add one final cruel detail. The person who breaks the curse must never tell anyone who the woman really is, or the transformation returns permanently. That detail alone has kept a lot of tellings deliberately vague about exactly which woman, in which town, the legend is actually describing. Even today, in rural parts of Brazil and neighboring countries, the legend of Mula sin Cabeza hasn't faded the way many older folk tales have. Farmers still occasionally report unexplained hoofbeats on empty roads late at night, along with a distinct smell of burning with no visible fire. Most people telling these stories today will admit, often with a slightly embarrassed laugh, that they don't really believe in her. But ask the same people if they'd still avoid an isolated country road alone on a Thursday night, and most give a much less confident answer. Tomás, the man from that Brazilian account, reportedly told the story to his own children and grandchildren almost exactly as he'd first told it. He was, by every account from people who knew him, a notably more devoutly cautious man about matters of faith and fidelity for the rest of his life. Whether that came from genuine supernatural terror or simply from one very effective, very memorable night, the practical result ended up the same. That might be the real power of a legend like this one. It doesn't just frighten people in the moment, it reshapes behavior for generations afterward. Woman punished for a hidden sin, transformed weekly into fire and fury, running roads that are still walked today by people who know her story. It's a brutal piece of folklore, built specifically to be unforgettable, and specifically aimed at controlling exactly the kind of secret it describes. Today, if you ask around rural Brazil or Venezuela, most people will point you toward at least one relative who swears they heard those hoofbeats once. And somewhere on one of those same quiet roads, according to the story, she's still out there running every single Thursday night, waiting for dawn. If you ever find yourself on an isolated road late on a Thursday night and you smell smoke with no fire in sight, remember the one piece of advice that's survived centuries. Get off the road, stay quiet, and whatever you do, don't look directly at what's running past you.